The morning sun cast a golden glow across Kensington Palace as Princess Kate stood before her bedroom mirror, carefully adjusting the pearl earrings that had once belonged to Princess Diana. Today was no ordinary day. The Westminster Abbey service for the Order of the British Empire was one of the most important ceremonies of the year, and the entire royal family would be attending together for the first time in months. Kate smoothed down her navy blue coat, dress, an elegant piece by her favorite designer that struck the perfect balance between formal and approachable. She had learned over the years that every choice mattered when appearing in public. The color, the length, even the accessories would be photographed and analyzed by millions around the world. But today felt different somehow. Today felt special. Down the hallway, she could hear the familiar sounds of morning chaos that came with having 3 children. George, now 11 and growing taller by the day, was likely struggling with his tie. Charlotte, 9 and fiercely independent, would be insisting she could manage her hair ribbon herself. And little Louis, 6 years old and full of endless energy, was probably bouncing around his room, unable to contain his excitement about riding in the big car with all the flags. William emerged from his dressing room, looking every inch the future king in his formal morning coat. His military medals caught the light as he moved, each one representing years of service and dedication. Kate noticed how he carried himself differently now compared to their early married days. The weight of responsibility had settled on his shoulders, but it suited him. He had grown into his role with grace and dignity. "The children ready?" he asked, straightening his tie one final time. Kate nodded, though they both knew that with their 3 little ones, ready was always a relative term. There would be last-minute shoe changes, forgotten gloves, and probably at least one minor meltdown before they made it to the car. Their protection officer knocked gently on the door. "Your Royal Highnesses, the cars will be ready in 15 minutes. Kate took a deep breath. 15 minutes to transform from a regular morning routine into a perfectly orchestrated royal appearance. She had done this hundreds of times before, but the butterflies never quite went away. As they walked toward the children's rooms, Kate reflected on how much their lives had changed since those early days when she was just Catherine Middleton, a university student who happened to catch the eye of a prince. Now she was preparing to attend one of Britain's most sacred ceremonies, knowing that every gesture would be watched and interpreted. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the privilege of representing something larger than themselves. George appeared in the hallway, looking remarkably grown up in his miniature formal wear. He had his father's eyes and was developing William's serious expression when faced with official duties. "Mum, do I really have to wear this tie?" he asked, tugging at the silk around his neck. Kate knelt down to his level, her practiced hands quickly adjusting the knot. "You look very handsome, darling," she said softly. "Today is important. We're representing not just our family, but everyone who believes in service and dedication to our country." George nodded solemnly, understanding more than most children his age about duty and purpose. Charlotte bounded out of her room, her dress perfectly arranged and her hair gleaming. She had inherited Kate's attention to detail and took pride in looking her best for official occasions. "I'm ready, Mummy," she announced with a bright smile. At 9, she was beginning to understand the unique role their family played, but she still managed to maintain the joy and spontaneity that Kate worked so hard to preserve in all 3 children. Louis was the last to emerge, his formal shorts and shirt somehow already slightly askew, despite having been dressed just minutes before. His cheeky grin and tousled hair reminded Kate so much of William at that age. The youngest of their trio, Louis brought an energy and unpredictability that kept everyone on their toes during public appearances. "Now remember," William said, gathering all 3 children around him, "today we'll be in a very special place where people have been coming to pray and celebrate for almost 1,000 years. We need to be respectful and quiet, but also proud of who we are and what we represent." Kate watched this moment with deep affection. William had such a natural way with the children, balancing the need for proper behavior with understanding of their young ages. It was one of the many things that had made her fall in love with him all those years ago at university. The family made their way downstairs, where their staff was waiting with final touches. Coats were smoothed, shoes were polished one last time, and Kate's handbag was checked to ensure it contained everything she might need during the long ceremony. The children's excitement was palpable as they walked through the familiar corridors of their home, knowing they were about to step into the formal world that existed beyond these walls. As they approached the entrance where their cars waited, Kate felt that familiar mix of nerves and anticipation that came before every major public appearance. The world would be watching today, but more importantly, they would be participating in a ceremony that honored ordinary people who had done extraordinary things in service to their communities and country. The protection officers opened the heavy doors and the family stepped out into the crisp morning air. The royal cars gleamed in the sunlight, their flags fluttering gently in the breeze. Staff members bowed politely as they passed, a reminder of the formality that surrounded their every public move. William helped Kate into the car, a gesture he had performed countless times but which never lost its meaning. As they settled into their seats with the children arranged carefully beside them, Kate took one last look at her family. In a few minutes, they would no longer be just William, Kate, George, Charlotte, and Louis having a family outing. They would become the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children, representing the monarchy and the nation at one of its most important ceremonies. The cars began to move, carrying them toward Westminster Abbey and whatever the day might bring. The convoy of royal cars moved smoothly through the streets of London, their route carefully planned and secured hours in advance. Kate gazed out the window at the familiar sights of the city she had come to call home, watching as early morning commuters stopped to wave when they recognized the distinctive vehicles. Some held up their phones to capture the moment, while others simply smiled and continued on their way. In the car, Charlotte pressed her face to the window with delight. "Look at all the people, Mummy," she exclaimed, waving enthusiastically at a group of tourists who had gathered on the sidewalk. Her natural warmth and genuine excitement reminded Kate of why public appearances with the children were so important, despite the challenges they presented. The British people loved seeing the next generation of royals, and the children's authentic reactions brought a human element to the ancient institution of the monarchy. Louis, sitting between his siblings, was bouncing slightly in his seat with barely contained energy. "Are we there yet?" he asked, the same question he posed during every car journey, royal or otherwise. William caught Kate's eye and smiled. No matter how grand the occasion, some things never changed when it came to traveling with children. George, the most serious of the three, was looking out the window with a thoughtful expression. At 11, he was old enough to understand the weight of these occasions, but young enough that the ceremony still held an element of mystery and excitement for him. Kate often worried about the pressure he would face as the future heir, but William assured her that they would continue to give him as normal a childhood as possible, within their extraordinary circumstances. As they drew closer to Westminster, the streets became more crowded with spectators. Barriers had been erected along the route, and police officers stood at regular intervals ensuring the safety of both the royal family and the gathered crowds. Kate could see the excited faces of children who had been brought by their parents to catch a glimpse of the royal cars, and she made sure to wave at each group they passed. "Remember," William said quietly to the children, "once we arrive, there will be lots of cameras and people wanting to take pictures. Just walk naturally, stay close to Mummy and Daddy, and smile if you feel like it. Don't worry if you feel nervous. That's perfectly normal." Kate appreciated how William always prepared the children for what to expect. Public appearances could be overwhelming even for adults, and she knew that the sensory overload of crowds, cameras, and formal protocol could be challenging for young ones. They had developed strategies over the years to help the children feel comfortable and confident in these situations. The iconic towers of Westminster Abbey came into view, and Kate felt her breath catch slightly, as it always did when she saw the magnificent Gothic architecture. She had been married in this very building, walking down that ancient aisle toward William as millions watched around the world. Today would be different, but no less meaningful. A celebration of service and dedication to the country they would one day serve as king and queen. Their car began to slow as they approached the Abbey entrance. Kate could see the red carpet that had been rolled out for the occasion, flanked by honor guards in their pristine uniforms. Camera crews from around the world were positioned strategically to capture every moment of their arrival, their long lenses trained on the approaching vehicles. "Here we go," William murmured, straightening his shoulders in preparation for the transition from private family moment to public royal duty. Kate checked her appearance one final time in the small mirror in her handbag, ensuring that her hair was still perfectly in place and that her lipstick hadn't smudged during the journey. The car came to a gentle stop, and Kate could hear the immediate increase in noise from the gathered crowd and media. Cheers went up as people realized the royal family had arrived, and she could see the flash of cameras beginning even through the tinted windows. This was always the moment when their private world ended and their public role began. Their protection. Officer stepped out first, quickly scanning the area before opening William's door. William emerged with practiced grace, immediately turning to help Kate as she stepped out onto the red carpet. The morning air was crisp and fresh, carrying with it the sounds of the city and the excitement of the crowd. The children followed, George first with the natural dignity he had inherited from his father, then Charlotte with her bright smile and confident wave to the cameras. Louis came last, his eyes wide as he took in the grandeur of the scene around him. Kate immediately moved to ensure all three children were close to her and William, creating the family unit that the photographers were eager to capture. The Dean of Westminster approached to greet them, his ceremonial robes adding to the solemnity of the occasion. Kate had always admired how seamlessly these formal greetings took place, each person knowing exactly their role in the carefully choreographed arrival. Behind the Dean stood other officials who would be participating in the ceremony, all dressed in their finest regalia. "Your Royal Highnesses," the Dean said with a respectful bow, "welcome to Westminster Abbey. We are honored by your presence at today's ceremony." William shook hands warmly, while Kate offered her practiced smile and gentle nod. She had learned that these initial moments set the tone for the entire event, and that graciousness and warmth from the royal family helped everyone feel more relaxed. As they began to walk toward the Abbey entrance, Kate positioned herself so that she could keep an eye on all three children while still maintaining her own composure for the cameras. Charlotte walked beautifully, her posture perfect, and her expression sweet but serious. George stayed close to William, already learning to match his father's measured pace and dignified bearing. Louis, true to form, was taking in everything around him with barely concealed wonder. Kate caught his hand gently as they walked, knowing that the 6-year-old might be tempted to point at something interesting or wave with more enthusiasm than protocol typically allowed. His natural curiosity and joy were wonderful qualities, but they required gentle guidance during formal occasions like this one. The massive wooden doors of Westminster Abbey stood open before them, revealing the soaring interior that had witnessed so many historic moments over the centuries. Kate felt a familiar sense of awe as they approached the threshold, knowing that they were about to participate in a ceremony that connected them to generations of British history and tradition. The sound of the organ began to drift out from within the Abbey, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. Kate took a deep breath, squeezed Louis's hand reassuringly, and prepared to step once again into the role that had become such an important part of who she was, not just as a mother and wife, but as a future queen. As the royal family crossed the threshold of Westminster Abbey, the magnitude of the ancient building enveloped them completely. The soaring Gothic arches stretched impossibly high above their heads, creating a sense of divine grandeur that never failed to inspire awe. Shafts of colored light streamed through the medieval stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the stone floor that had been worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Kate felt the familiar hush that seemed to descend whenever she entered this sacred space. Even with hundreds of people already seated for the ceremony, there was something about Westminster Abbey that demanded reverence and quiet respect. She noticed how instinctively the children's voices dropped to whispers, sensing the solemnity of their surroundings without needing to be told. The congregation was already in place, rising respectfully as the royal family made their entrance. Kate's trained eye quickly scanned the assembled guests. She could see military officers in their dress uniforms, distinguished civilians who were receiving honors, government officials, and representatives from various charitable organizations. Each person present had earned their place here through service, dedication, or achievement, making this gathering truly special. Charlotte's eyes were wide as she took in the incredible architecture around them. Kate remembered her own first visit to the Abbey as William's girlfriend, how overwhelmed she had felt by the weight of history contained within these walls. Every monarch since William the Conqueror had been crowned here, and countless royal weddings, funerals, and state occasions had taken place beneath these vaults. Today, her own children were walking in those same footsteps. An usher dressed in traditional court dress guided them toward their designated seats in the front section of the Abbey. Kate was always impressed by how smoothly these ceremonial arrangements worked, with each person knowing exactly where to go and what to do. Years of planning went into events like this, ensuring that every detail was perfect and that the dignity of the occasion was maintained. George walked beside his father with increasing confidence, his posture straight and his expression appropriately serious. Kate could see how he was learning to carry himself in these formal settings, understanding instinctively that his behavior reflected not just on himself, but on the entire royal family. At 11, he was beginning to grasp the concept of duty and public service that would define his future role. Louis, meanwhile, was clearly fascinated by everything around him. His head turned constantly as he tried to take in all the details: the ornate choir stalls, the elaborate altar, the banners hanging from the walls, and the magnificent tomb of Queen Elizabeth I that they passed on their way to their seats. Kate gently guided him forward while allowing him to satisfy his natural curiosity about this incredible place. As they reached their seats, Kate was pleased to see that the children's placement had been carefully considered. Charlotte was positioned between herself and William, where she would feel most secure, while George sat beside his father in a spot that acknowledged his growing maturity. Louis was placed next to Kate, knowing that he might need occasional gentle reminders about proper behavior during the long ceremony. The organ music swelled as the last of the congregation took their places, creating an atmosphere of majesty and celebration. Kate opened the ceremonial program, noting the order of service and the names of those who would be receiving honors today. Each person listed had made significant contributions to British society: teachers who had transformed schools in disadvantaged areas, volunteers who had dedicated decades to helping others, and military personnel who had shown exceptional courage in the line of duty. She pointed out some of the details in the program to Charlotte, who was always interested in understanding what was happening around her. Kate had learned that explaining the purpose and meaning of these ceremonies helped the children feel more engaged and less restless during the formal proceedings. It also reinforced the important message that these events were about celebrating the very best of human nature and public service. William leaned over slightly to speak quietly to George, probably explaining some aspect of the ceremony or pointing out architectural features of interest. Kate loved watching these father-son moments, seeing how William was gradually sharing his knowledge and passion for history and tradition with their eldest child. It was part of George's informal education in what it meant to be a future king. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the Abbey as the ceremonial procession began to form. Kate could hear the rustle of silk and satin as clergy members took their positions, their colorful vestments adding to the visual splendor of the occasion. The ceremony was about to begin in earnest, and she felt that familiar flutter of anticipation that came before every major royal event. A hush fell over the congregation as the Dean of Westminster took his place at the altar. His voice, trained to carry throughout the vast space without modern amplification, began the opening words of the service. Kate had always been moved by how these ancient words and traditions connected the present moment to centuries of British history and culture. Charlotte sat up straighter in her seat, clearly understanding that something important was beginning. She had inherited Kate's ability to sense the mood of an occasion and respond appropriately. Louis, too, seemed to realize that this was a special moment, his usual restless energy contained by the solemnity surrounding them. As the ceremony progressed, Kate found herself reflecting on the incredible privilege of their position. They were witnessing the recognition of ordinary people who had done extraordinary things, individuals who had chosen to dedicate their lives to making the world a better place. These were the true heroes of British society, and being able to honor them was one of the most meaningful aspects of royal duty. The first recipient was called Forward, a teacher who had spent 40 years in challenging schools, never giving up on any child who came through her classroom. Kate watched as the woman, dressed in her finest outfit and beaming with pride, walked forward to receive her honor. Behind her in the congregation, Kate could see family members wiping away tears of joy, sharing in this moment of recognition for their loved one's life of service. One by one, the recipients approached to receive their medals and honors. Each had a story of dedication, courage, or exceptional achievement. There was a firefighter who had saved multiple lives during a devastating blaze, a volunteer who had spent decades helping homeless individuals find shelter and support, and a young entrepreneur who had created jobs in a struggling community while maintaining the highest ethical standards. Kate made sure the children were watching these presentations, understanding that this was what true nobility looked like. Not titles inherited by birth, but honors earned through service to others. This was the lesson she most wanted them to absorb from occasions like this, that their privileged position came with the responsibility to serve and help others whenever possible. The music, the ceremony, and the atmosphere combined to create something truly special. Even Lewis remained remarkably still, sensing the importance of what was happening around him. Kate felt proud of all three children and grateful for this opportunity to share such a meaningful experience with them in this most sacred and historic of settings. The ceremony continued with increasing grandeur as more recipients came forward to receive their honors. Kate noticed how each person's walk to the altar told a story. Some moved with military precision, others with the careful steps of advanced age, and a few practically bounced with excitement. What united them all was the unmistakable glow of pride in the presence of family members in the congregation, whose faces shone with love and admiration. Charlotte whispered very quietly to her mother, "Mummy, why is that lady crying?" She was pointing discreetly toward a woman in the front row whose tears were flowing freely as her husband, a war veteran, received recognition for his decades of work with other former servicemen struggling with their transition to civilian life. Kate leaned down and whispered back, "Those are happy tears, darling. She's so proud of what her husband has accomplished." This exchange reminded Kate of why these public appearances with the children were so valuable, despite the logistical challenges they presented. The children were learning to understand human emotion and the importance of service through direct observation, not just through stories or lectures. They were witnessing real people being honored for real contributions, making the abstract concept of duty much more concrete and meaningful. George sat quietly beside William, his attention focused on every detail of the ceremony. Kate could see him taking mental notes, the way he did during their private conversations about royal responsibility. At 11, he was becoming increasingly aware that ceremonies like this would be a regular part of his future life, and that understanding their meaning and purpose was essential to fulfilling his role effectively. The dean's voice resonated throughout the abbey as he spoke about the importance of service to community and country. His words seemed to hang in the air beneath the soaring stone arches, adding weight and significance to what might otherwise have been simple platitudes. Kate had always been struck by how the setting of Westminster Abbey transformed ordinary words into something profound and memorable. As the ceremony progressed, Louis began to show signs of the restlessness that was natural for a 6-year-old during a long, formal event. Kate had anticipated this and came prepared with quiet distractions. A small book about the Abbey's history with pictures that might hold his interest, and a few subtle fidget toys that wouldn't be noticeable to photographers but would help him channel his energy constructively. She also used a technique that had worked well in the past, quietly pointing out interesting architectural details for Lewis to spot and count. "Can you find all the carved angels on that column?" she whispered, giving him a focused task that engaged his mind while requiring him to remain still and quiet. His face lit up with the challenge, and he began carefully scanning the ornate stonework around them. William caught Kate's eye and smiled approvingly at her gentle management of their youngest child. They had developed this kind of wordless communication over years of public appearances, able to coordinate their responses to the children's needs without drawing attention or disrupting the flow of events. It was one of many small ways they supported each other in their public roles. The next recipient called forward was particularly meaningful, a young woman who had started a charity providing educational opportunities for underprivileged children. As she walked toward the altar, Kate reflected on her own charitable work and the passion she felt for ensuring every child had the chance to reach their full potential. This was exactly the kind of initiative that deserved recognition and support. Charlotte seemed especially interested in this particular recipient, perhaps recognizing someone closer to her own generation, making a significant difference in the world. Kate made a mental note to research this young woman's charity later, thinking it might be an organization worthy of royal patronage or support. These ceremonies often introduce the royal family to inspiring individuals and causes that deserved wider recognition. The music swelled again as the recipient received her medal, and Kate noticed several young people in the congregation who had clearly come to support their friend and mentor. Their faces radiated admiration and gratitude, testament to the real impact one person's dedication could have on many lives. This was the essence of what the honors system was meant to celebrate: individual excellence in service to others, and they reached the midpoint of the ceremony. Kate was pleased to see that all three children remained engaged and well-behaved. George continued to watch with mature attention. Charlotte asked occasional quiet questions that showed her genuine interest, and Louis had successfully spotted most of the carved angels she had challenged him to find, keeping him contentedly occupied. The next phase of the ceremony involved the presentation of higher honors to individuals whose contributions had been truly exceptional. These recipients included a surgeon who had pioneered life-saving techniques, a scientist whose research had led to breakthrough treatments for rare diseases, and an educator who had transformed an entire community's approach to learning and development. Kate found herself deeply moved by the diversity of ways people had chosen to serve others. Some had worked within established institutions like hospitals or schools, others had started their own organizations, and still others had simply seen a need in their community and found creative ways to address it. The common thread was a willingness to put the needs of others before their own comfort and convenience. William leaned over to speak quietly to George, pointing out something significant about one of the recipients. Kate couldn't hear the specific words, but she could see George nodding thoughtfully, absorbing whatever lesson his father was sharing. These moments of informal education during formal ceremonies were invaluable for their children's understanding of their future roles. The abbey itself seemed to be participating in the ceremony, with afternoon sunlight now streaming through different windows, casting new patterns of colored light across the ancient stones. Kate had always felt that Westminster Abbey was a living building, one that responded to and enhanced whatever was taking place within its walls. Today was no exception. The very architecture seemed to be celebrating these remarkable individuals and their achievements. As the ceremony moved toward its conclusion, Kate began to prepare mentally for the transition that would come next. Soon they would be moving from the formal religious setting to the more social atmosphere of the reception, where they would have the opportunity to meet personally with the honor recipients and their families. This was often the most rewarding part of these events, when formal protocol gave way to genuine human connections. She checked once more on each of the children, noting with satisfaction that they had all risen to the occasion beautifully. These experiences were shaping them into the kind of people who would be able to carry on the royal tradition of public service with grace, understanding, and genuine care for the people they would one day serve as senior members of the royal family. As the final notes of the ceremonial music faded throughout Westminster Abbey, the formal portion of the service drew to its close. The dean offered concluding prayers of thanksgiving and blessing, his words echoing off the ancient stone walls, before settling into the reverent silence that followed. Kate felt the familiar shift in atmosphere that signaled the transition from ceremony to the more personal interactions that would follow. The congregation began to stir slightly, though protocol dictated that everyone would remain seated until the royal family had processed out first. Kate gathered her handbag and helped Louis straighten his jacket, which had become slightly rumpled during the long service despite his best efforts to sit still. Charlotte smoothed her own dress with the careful attention to appearance that she had inherited from her mother. William stood first, offering his hand to help Kate rise gracefully from her seat. This small gesture, performed hundreds of times over the years, still carried meaning for both of them, a moment of partnership and mutual support in the midst of their public duties. George and Charlotte rose naturally, having watched their parents' example, while Louis needed a gentle reminder about which foot to step forward with first. The processional out of the Abbey was just as carefully choreographed as their entrance had been, but somehow felt more relaxed now that the formal ceremony was complete. Kate could see the recipients and their families beginning to prepare for the reception that would follow, their faces bright with excitement about the opportunity to meet the royal family personally. As they walked back down the ancient aisle, Kate noticed details she had missed during their entrance, when her attention was focused primarily on the children and the ceremony ahead. The afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows created an entirely different atmosphere than the morning sun had provided, painting the Abbey in deeper, richer colors that seemed to reflect the satisfaction of a meaningful ceremony, completed successfully. Charlotte walked beside her with increasing confidence, clearly pleased that she had managed to sit through the entire service with appropriate dignity. At 9 years old, she was developing a real understanding of these formal occasions and seemed to genuinely enjoy the pageantry and tradition they represented. Kate made a mental note to talk with her later about some of the recipients who had particularly impressed her. George maintained his serious demeanor as they processed out, but Kate could see a glimmer of excitement in his eyes at the prospect of the reception to follow. He had always enjoyed the more informal interactions with the public, where his natural curiosity and genuine interest in people's stories could shine through the constraints of formal protocol. These conversations often became highlights of royal engagements for the entire family. Louis, energized by the prospect of being able to move around freely again, practically bounced as they walked, though he managed to keep his enthusiasm within appropriate bounds. Kate admired his natural resilience and ability to adapt to these demanding situations, understanding that his cheerful personality would serve him well in future royal duties, even if those duties would be different from what George would eventually pursue. As they emerged from the Abbey into the afternoon sunlight, Kate was greeted by the sight of crowds that had grown considerably since their morning arrival. Word had spread throughout London that the royal family was attending the ceremony, and people had gathered hoping for a glimpse of them and perhaps a royal wave. The children automatically began waving to the enthusiastic crowd, their natural warmth and genuine pleasure at seeing people coming through clearly. The reception was being held in the historic Jerusalem Chamber, one of Westminster Abbey's most beautiful rooms, with its medieval timber ceiling and tapestries that had witnessed centuries of important meetings and celebrations. As they entered the elegant space, Kate immediately began the mental calculations that had become second nature to her. How many people were present, how much time they should spend with each group, and how to ensure that every recipient felt acknowledged and valued. The honor recipients and their families were arranged throughout the room, creating natural conversation clusters that would allow the royal family to move gracefully from group to group. Kate had learned over the years that these receptions required a delicate balance, spending enough time with each person to make the interaction meaningful, while ensuring that everyone present had their moment with the royal family. William immediately approached the first group, his natural ease in these situations evident as he began chatting with a military veteran who had received recognition for his charity work. Kate watched with admiration as her husband's genuine interest in people's stories drew out details about the man's service and his ongoing efforts to help other veterans transition to civilian life. Charlotte stayed close to Kate initially, observing the adult interactions and learning by example how to engage with strangers in these formal but friendly settings. Kate had found that gradually introducing the children to these social aspects of royal duty was more effective than trying to explain everything in advance. Seeing the actual interactions helped them understand the balance between formality and warmth that was essential to successful royal engagement. The first person Kate approached was the young teacher who had been honored for her 4 decades of service in challenging schools. The woman's face lit up when Kate extended her hand, and their conversation quickly moved from formal pleasantries to a genuine discussion about education, student needs, and the rewards and challenges of teaching in underprivileged communities. "Your Royal Highness," the teacher said, "I never imagined when I started teaching that I would one day be standing in Westminster Abbey talking with you about my work. It feels like a dream." Kate was touched by the woman's humble amazement and made sure to spend extra time hearing about specific students whose lives had been transformed through dedicated teaching and mentoring. George, meanwhile, had discovered a young recipient who had started a technology training program for elderly residents in his community. The conversation between the 11-year-old prince and the innovative young man was animated and genuine, with George asking thoughtful questions about how technology could help solve social problems. Kate was pleased to see her eldest son engaging so naturally with someone not much older than he was. Charlotte found herself in conversation with the family members of one of the recipients, including several children close to her own age. Their initial shyness quickly gave way to animated discussion about school, hobbies, and what it was like to have a family member receiving such an important honor. Kate observed from nearby, pleased to see Charlotte's social skills developing so naturally. Louis, still full of energy despite the long ceremony, charmed everyone he encountered with his genuine curiosity and unfiltered enthusiasm. When he met the firefighter who had been honored for his heroic rescues, Louis peppered him with questions about fire engines, rescue equipment, and what it felt like to run into burning buildings to help people. The firefighter was clearly delighted by the young prince's interest and spent considerable time explaining his work in terms a 6-year-old could understand and appreciate. As the reception continued in the Jerusalem chamber, Kate found herself in one of the most rewarding conversations of the afternoon with a grandmother who had been honored for establishing a community garden program that had transformed several neglected neighborhoods. The elderly woman spoke with passionate enthusiasm about how bringing people together to grow food had created connections and friendships that went far beyond gardening. "Your Royal Highness," the woman said, her eyes sparkling with joy. "You should see what happens when neighbors who have never spoken start working side by side in the soil. Children learn where food comes from. Teenagers find purpose and pride. And elderly residents share wisdom that might otherwise be lost. It's not really about the vegetables at all. It's about growing community." Kate was genuinely moved by this description and found herself thinking about how this model might be replicated in other areas. She made a mental note to have her private secretary follow up with information about the program, thinking it might be perfect for royal patronage or support through her existing charitable work focused on early childhood development and family well-being. Across the room, William was deep in conversation with a group of military personnel who had been honored for their service in various conflicts and peacekeeping missions around the world. His own military background allowed him to connect with their experiences in a way that went beyond polite royal small talk, and Kate could see how much these veterans appreciated having their service truly understood and valued by someone who had worn the uniform himself. Charlotte had discovered another young recipient, a university student who had organized mental health support programs for her peers after recognizing the struggles many students faced with anxiety and depression. Their conversation was remarkably sophisticated for Charlotte's 9 years, touching on topics of kindness, helping others, and the importance of talking about feelings when things become difficult. Kate watched this interaction with particular interest, knowing that Charlotte's generation would grow up in a world where mental health awareness was far more advanced than it had been during her own childhood. She was proud to see her daughter engaging thoughtfully with these complex topics and showing genuine empathy for the challenges others faced. George had moved on to speaking with a scientist who had been recognized for breakthrough research in renewable energy. The conversation quickly became technical, with the researcher explaining solar panel efficiency and wind turbine design in terms that made George's eyes light up with fascination. Kate smiled as she observed her eldest son's natural curiosity about how things worked and his ability to grasp complex concepts when they were explained clearly. Louis, meanwhile, had somehow ended up surrounded by a group of recipients' grandchildren who were close to his age. What had started as formal introductions had evolved into an animated discussion about favorite sports, school subjects, and whether anyone had ever seen a real castle besides the ones their families lived in. The other children seemed delighted to discover that the young prince was just as interested in football and video games as they were. As the afternoon progressed, Kate found herself reflecting on how these receptions had become some of her favorite parts of royal duties. The formal ceremony was beautiful and meaningful, but these personal conversations revealed the real impact that dedicated individuals could have on their communities and country. Every person in the room had chosen to look beyond their own immediate needs and find ways to serve others. She moved through the room with practiced grace, ensuring that she spent meaningful time with each group while keeping an eye on all three children and their various conversations. Years of experience had taught her how to appear completely focused on whoever she was speaking with while maintaining awareness of everything else happening around her. William caught her eye from across the room and gestured subtly toward the clock on the mantelpiece. They had been at the reception for nearly an hour, and protocol suggested that they should begin thinking about their departure soon. Too short a stay would seem rushed and dismissive, but staying too long could become overwhelming for both the guests and the staff managing the event. Kate began the delicate process of concluding conversations while leaving each person feeling valued and heard. She had perfected this skill over years of public engagements, learning how to bring discussions to natural endpoints that felt satisfying rather than abrupt. The key was always to end on a positive note that acknowledged the importance of the person's work or contribution. As she prepared to gather the children for their departure, Kate was approached by the Dean of Westminster, who wanted to express his gratitude for the royal family's participation in the ceremony. "Your presence here today has meant so much to everyone being honored," he said warmly. "Seeing you take the time to really listen to their stories and understand their work makes these recognitions even more meaningful." Kate was touched by his words, knowing that the royal family's attendance at these ceremonies was about much more than tradition or duty. It was about using their position to shine light on extraordinary, ordinary people who might otherwise go unrecognized for their contributions to society. This was the kind of royal work that felt most worthwhile and fulfilling. Charlotte appeared at her mother's side, having gracefully concluded her own conversations with the help of gentle guidance from one of their protection officers. She looked pleased with herself and slightly amazed by the experience of talking with so many interesting adults who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and questions. George and Louis were collected with similar ease, both boys clearly energized by their interactions but ready to transition back to the more familiar rhythm of family life. As they prepared to leave the Jerusalem chamber, Kate made sure they all turned to wave goodbye to the honor recipients and their families, acknowledging once more the special nature of this gathering. The walk back through Westminster Abbey felt different now, quieter and more reflective after the warmth and energy of the reception. The ancient stones seemed to hold the echoes of all the conversations and connections that had been made that afternoon, adding another layer of meaning to the building's long history of bringing people together for significant occasions. As they emerged into the late afternoon London sunshine, Kate felt the familiar satisfaction that came after a successful royal engagement. The ceremony had honored deserving individuals. The children had behaved beautifully and learned valuable lessons about service and dedication, and genuine connections had been made between the royal family and the remarkable people they had fatsuri. The car journey home was filled with excited chatter from all three children, each wanting to share their favorite conversations and most interesting discoveries from the day. Charlotte talked animatedly about the university students' mental health programs. George described the scientists' renewable energy research in impressive detail, and Louis acted out his conversation with the heroic firefighter with dramatic gestures that made everyone laugh. William and Kate exchanged satisfied glances as they listened to their children processing the day's experiences. This was exactly why they chose to include the children in these formal occasions whenever possible, not just to prepare them for their future roles, but to help them understand from an early age that privilege came with responsibility and that the most important work anyone could do was finding ways to serve others and make the world a better place. As Kensington Palace came into view, Kate felt grateful for the day they had shared together as a family, representing something larger than themselves while remaining authentically human in their interactions with the extraordinary people they had been privileged to meet. These were the moments that made all the challenges of royal life feel worthwhile and meaningful.